deportation officer on September 11th, and actually I was in New York City when the Twin Towers were struck.
Anthony and I met working in the institutional hearing program. I was a trial attorney, so I was the person who was taking a lot of the cases that he was arresting people for and putting them in front of the immigration judge. Welcome to No Border, No Country. Today we have a very special guest who we'll be talking with. It's Anthony Zito. Anthony's a good friend of mine from way back. We worked together at the institutional hearing program at U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Anthony was a deport officer. I was a trial attorney at the time. Anthony started as an immigration inspector. He worked in New York and then in California, as well as in the pre-flight inspection in Dublin, and then he moved over to become a deport officer. So Anthony, welcome to the No Border, No Country podcast. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you for having me.
So we brought Anthony on to talk about the realities of immigration enforcement. You hear a lot of things on the news about immigration enforcement, how it gets done, and what it looks like. There's been a lot of discussion of needing a deportation force. Well, Anthony was part of that deportation force that exists already, and he was on the street actually arresting illegal alien fugitives. We got to say the A word in this circumstance. So anyways, Anthony, maybe to start out, tell us a little bit about how you got started in immigration and how your career went.
Sure, and I'm going to clarify the one thing that you said, illegal alien fugitives. They were almost always, or actually always, criminal aliens.
Okay.
So not just illegal aliens, they were criminal as well.
That's an important point.
You know, we have to weed through everything, and there's no way that we could just grab everyone. We never did raids where we just swept people off the street. We were always targeting specific subjects, and they were always criminal. So just to clarify that, but I'll go back to myself then. Well, in 1991, I was graduating from college, and we had a government recruiter come to our school and talk about jobs with the government. And they explained to us, you got to go take a test to get a job for a number of different agencies. And I said, hey, what the heck? I need to start working. So at the time, business marketing wasn't going to do it. So I took the test, and I guess I did well. And at that time, I was hired as an immigration inspector. I had never traveled internationally, didn't know anything about immigration. And I was like, oh, okay, it's down at JFK, relatively close to where I live. And so I took the job, and it was a pretty good experience. Working at JFK, I got to see everything under the sun coming in. And I was the welcome wagon for immigrants, non-immigrants, and asylees, etc., that were coming in through our airport. Went to the academy a year later and had an opportunity, saw an opening out in California and said, what the heck, let me put in for it. I'm young, not married, single. Let me try something else out, and went out to San Francisco, worked at the airport there as well, doing the same function, an inspector, which is now the equivalent of a Customs and Border Protection officer. And basically at the time, because we were INS, we only inspected people. We didn't do the baggage. We did the applicants for admission. Was there for a couple of years and wasn't crazy about California to begin with. It was San Francisco. It was not that New York is any better, but I went from bad to worse and saw an opening for deportation officer and saw that it was pretty close to my home and said, oh, let me apply for this. Got selected, and the position itself was a newly created, another IPO or what have you, IPA they call them. It's a position. It was specifically for the IRP or the IHP, which was at the time the institutional hearing program. So what I had heard back then was that 7 of the states that were most impacted by criminal aliens incarcerated in their prisons sued the feds and said, hey, feds, you guys are responsible for letting all these aliens into the country. We have them locked up in our prisons, and we need to do something about it. And the government's response at the time was, we'll create these IRPs, these institutional removal programs, or these IHPs, where we'll put immigration judges inside the prisons. We'll have them have the subjects placed in removal proceedings or deportation proceedings at the time. And we can get the process going so that either you can parole them and let them get deported before their sentence is up, or once their sentence is done, it saves the government money as well, because we don't have to detain them any longer through proceedings, and we can deport them immediately. So that program worked really well in New York State. We were actually stationed within a maximum security prison, downstate correctional facility, which has since closed because of the political atmosphere in New York. But
that's how Anthony and I met in prison. and spent time in prison together.
Insert joke here. Yeah.
Face to face, we met though.
Yes.
And so the program worked pretty well, and we would actually, grab subjects as they were paroled from state custody and bring them into our detention. Some of them were already completed with their removal proceedings, so we could ship them out relatively quickly. Others that had started the proceedings, but at least the process was already there, and so we could complete it while they're in our custody. And New York State benefited as well, because they created a parole specifically for immigration criminal aliens, which was called a conditional parole for deportation only.
I can only imagine some of the situations you must have found yourself in working in removals, but was there one experience during your time that really stuck with you that's hard to forget?
I was a deportation officer on September 11th, and actually I was in New York City when the Twin Towers were struck. I was walking into Federal Plaza to do my union duties, where we had the office down there at the Federal Building, right downtown Manhattan, literally blocks from the World Trade Center. And I was actually walking into the building and saw one of the towers smoking, and people were like, "Oh, a plane hit the tower." And I'm like, I couldn't see from the angle I was walking that there was actually a plane, but I saw some smoke, and I'm like, "Oh, it was probably a little prop plane or something that hit the tower." Didn't think much of it. Continued walking. As I was about to walk into the building, I heard an explosion. Looked to my back, and I saw the ball of fire, and it was the second tower getting hit. And at that time, then people were flocking out of the building, and and everybody was trying to get the hell out of Lower Manhattan. The next day, I went to work, and they had kind of figured out who had done this already. I think by the second or third day, they knew that it was foreign terrorists. They knew that they were here on student visas, going to flight schools. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, the INS at the time should have been keeping tabs on these guys. So are we going to go out there and start rounding up every flight, every Middle Easterner from in a flight school? What are we doing? Are we going to start, doing investigations? Are we going to start, grabbing bad guys? And I was told by my supervisor, just sit right down. We're not doing anything right now. And I was like, really? We're at war now. Our lives have been changed forever. And we're going to sit back and do nothing? It was just really mind-boggling and very sad at the same time.
What does that mean to you in terms of U.S. immigration policy at that time and now, and the terror threats we face? We hear about these people on terror watch lists coming through. How does that play to you?
So we know who comes in if they come in a non-immigrant visa. We know these guys overstay. We know that who's supposed to be here and who's not, at least from a non-immigrant standpoint. And we're not going out and grabbing those guys that overstay their visas. And who knows what the hell is happening at the border and who's coming in. So it's actually, and they said, "Oh, we figured things out. Our intelligence is better nowadays." And so what happened back in 2001 isn't going to happen again. That's bullshit. They're appeasing us. They're trying to keep the public, blind and dumb. And I personally think that we're in worse shape, and especially with that porous border. So, we're doomed.
Now, you said something before we went on camera that I think the audience should hear. You said the September 11, 2001 attacks were an immigration thing. nothing else. And I agree with you. It got classified as a failure of imagination and a failure of intelligence, I think the 9/11 Commission said. But I think to anybody who worked in immigration, we were all looking at it going, no, it was a failure of immigration policy and immigration enforcement. What do you think about that?
I wholeheartedly agree with you. That's what I said. And everybody's like, no, it's the FBI. They should have been keeping tabs. And no, it's this one and it's that one. And everybody's pointing fingers. We did it. We let those guys in. We weren't keeping tabs on them. Mea culpa, man.
Yeah, well, it was the second time because that all started with the blind shake. People forget there were 2 attacks on the World Trade Center. And right about the time you would have been starting doing this, do you remember when they had that cell that the NYPD found that was building bombs to do an attack on the subway?
I vaguely remember that. I don't remember specific.
And I don't think immigration ever responded directly to that either. I think eventually the guys wound up getting deported. But to me, immigration ought to be the first line response to stuff like that.
Well, here in New York, you always hear about how the NYPD has these special terrorist units. They have cops that go overseas and are posted in overseas countries. And I'm like, isn't that the Fed's job? Why does the NYPD have to do this type of work? It doesn't, it's just strange. And are they cooperating with one another? Are they sharing information? If they were, the feds already have people overseas. Why do we have to have the local cops have people overseas as well? It just, you think about that and it's like, yeah, maybe we aren't really as better off now than we were back